All right, so we are getting started. Welcome to everybody who is joining us for another EBFA webinar. If this is your first time tuning in on an EBFA webinar, very special welcome. If you are a returning listener, we of course value your returned presence and your support in our education, so very special welcome to you as well. Before we get started, I'll run over a few kind of maintenance things or logistical things. The way that this is going to work is that I will run through the webinar, which will be approximately 30 minutes, depending on how long-winded I get or excited on this topic. And then we'll go over any questions that you guys may have. So if you think of any questions throughout, I do encourage you to type those throughout the webinar, and then we will be sure to answer those. You can type those questions into your control panel. If you scroll down, there is a questions tab. You type those in, and then we'll go over those at the end. If you happen to have to leave early and you have a question on any of the topic that we're speaking of, please do not hesitate to email me at education@ebfafitness.com. And then all of our webinars are recorded, they're archived, they're found on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ebfafitness. And then if you happen to want the PowerPoint or the PDF to this webinar, I will be including the bibliography. So if you want to reference some of the articles that I am speaking about, then know that you can email me to that same email address, and I will send you the bibliography. Very funny. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. And here we go. All right, so my name is Dr. Splichal, Dr. Emily. If you are not familiar with my background and a little bit my perspective on how I approach human movement, foot and ankle, rehab, correctives, and performance, is I am a clinician by trade, even though I did start within the fitness industry. So I have a deep appreciation for human movement, functional movement, integrated movement, and then went to podiatry school, was trained as a surgeon, but then ended up going back to get my master's to further build that appreciation for the interconnected role that the foot plays in human movement. So my passion when I treat any of my patients is that our foot is deeply integrated with the rest of the body. When I got my master's, I actually focused on primarily barefoot movement, barefoot science, and really the power of the plantar foot. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today in what I often reference as the barefoot advantage. And understanding the barefoot advantage means that you're understanding different foot types, but you're really looking at the foot as a highly or very powerful neuromuscular structure. So it is the art of tapping into the plantar proprioceptors and then using that to control your client, patient, or athlete's movements. All of this education is built into, or all of the science is built into education under EBFA, which is my education company, which is where we have the Barefoot Training Specialist Certification, Barefoot RX. We have the Bare Workout. I will be referencing our new product, which is Naboso technology, and we have several products underneath that, which again is based on surface science, proprioceptive research, barefoot science, etc. To learn more about any of these things, please do check out ebfaglobal.com. All right, so we're going to get started jumping into the goods and the nitty-gritty of this PowerPoint. So we are transitioning from barefoot training to what we call surface science. So it's one thing to think about the shoes that we're placing on our clients' feet or athletes' feet and the power of barefoot stimulation. A lot of what I reference is activating the foot, doing what's called barefoot before shod. So you are tapping into those proprioceptors. But then what starts to happen when you get into those shoes? What happens to the neuromuscular system? And can we think about the surfaces that we're training on and perhaps a little bit more on the inside of the shoe? So not thinking about minimal versus motion control, but thinking about what is the skin of your foot literally contacting in the shoe, and can you actually modify that to get higher proprioceptive input? That's the way that we want to be thinking about the foot. So the power of the plantar proprioceptors. We have thousands of proprioceptors in the bottom of the feet that are sensitive to very specific stimulation. In my education and in my different webinars and lectures that I give, I often focus on the plantar proprioceptors, and I refer to them as small nerve proprioceptors. Understanding and appreciating that the plantar skin has these small nerve proprioceptors, which are often referenced as A beta. So your A beta proprioceptors, mechanoceptors, are different from your large nerve or your A alpha type proprioceptors or mechanoceptors. Now, your small nerve proprioceptors are often referred to as Merkel disc, Pacinian corpuscles, Meissner's corpuscles, Ruffini endings, different classifications or specific small nerve proprioceptors that are sensitive to different stimulation, such as vibration, skin stretch, light touch, deep pressure, different stimuli that the body is using to perceive and control and shift for every step or every shift in our center of gravity. Now, this is as opposed to large nerve proprioceptors, which are referred to as A alpha, and these would be your GTO or your Golgi tendon organs and your muscle spindles. So a lot of the stretch reflex that we think of, say you're standing on a wobble board or an unstable surface, a lot of that information that's coming in is actually stretch reflexes from your peroneal tendon. Those are large nerve proprioceptive responses. Now, when you look at the research of A beta versus A alpha proprioceptive response and postural control, what the research shows and supports is that a lot of what that's coming from and the proprioceptors that actually play a larger role in postural control is small nerve or A beta proprioceptors. Now, those A beta proprioceptors can be further broken down into slow adapting and fast adapting proprioceptors. Now, if we look at this is the different types, so all A beta, that respond at a different rate and they respond to a different stimulation. So I'm going to make this so that it's super easy to kind of read and understand and apply. Is the SA is going to be slow adapting. So you have slow adapting, type 1, type 2, fast adapting, type 1, type 2. The way that I want you to look at this is you can see that there's different skin type. Glabrous skin is skin on the bottom of the foot. Hairy skin is obviously outside, so it's going to be your leg, your arm, etc. When we look at these different skin types matching to the receptor, the one that really stands out is the fast adapting type 2 A beta that's found only in your glabrous skin or the skin on the bottom of the foot, happens to be Pacinian corpuscles, and it happens to be sensitive to vibration. Right? Anyone who's taken any of my courses knows that I focus heavy on the ability to perceive vibration, because your body uses the perception of vibration to know how hard you're striking the ground and to maintain dynamic balance during walking, running, closed chain movements, etc. So your body needs to be able to bring in that sense of vibration. And your sense of vibration needs to be very fast and it needs to be very accurate. And through that information, we are able to control these subtle shifts in our center of gravity. So now when we look at this a little bit further, we're focusing on this A beta vibration, is you can actually look at the different distribution in the bottom of the foot of these different mechanoceptors. And if we look, we can see that there's a little bit different placement, different regions. However, if we look for a consistency of them, or if we focus on the one that primarily has to do with vibration, which is the FA type 2, we can see that it is primarily positioned in the ball of the foot. So then we could argue, or if you're thinking about surfaces and landing techniques, which we're going to speak about soon, and different textural stimulation when I talk about insoles, the ability to bring in vibration and detect vibration really has to do with the ball of the foot. Makes sense when you think about landing techniques. Typically when we land from a jump, we are going ball heel. Technically, that's the way that you should be landing. If you're thinking of a midfoot strike pattern, right? And maybe you're trying to make an argument of should we be doing a midfoot strike pattern versus a heel strike pattern? Well, when we're running, we need to be able to very quickly perceive vibration because when you're running, it's higher and it's faster. So if you do a midfoot strike pattern, you are technically stimulating the part of the foot. Your initial stimulation is to the part of the foot that is more sensitive to vibration, which means you technically want to strike your midfoot first. That could be an argument of why, another argument for why you should be shifting towards a midfoot strike pattern. So the way that we want to think about the foot and the use of these different mechanoceptors is that your body is continuously bringing in this information. You need to bring this information in. This information is used to correct and create an accurate loading response to match what actually is coming in. That motor response is in direct response to impact forces, but it's also used to maintain dynamic balance. Remember, we use the vibration to load, but we use the vibration to maintain balance. So bringing in that information is very important. Now, if we're taking on average 5,000 to 8,000 steps a day, maybe a little bit more. Most of my patients here in New York City are taking on average probably 12 to 17,000 steps a day is the average that my patients are taking, which is a lot. That means that your foot needs to be able to autocorrect for every single one of those steps. Every single step that we're taking is slightly different. We need to allow that proprioceptive information to come in to allow your nervous system to autocorrect. That's really why the bottom of the foot is designed this way, because it's the only contact point between the body and the ground. So it plays a very important role in this autocorrection. Now, when you start to put shoes on and cushion and orthotics and more barrier between you and the ground and you and that information, you take away the ability of your nervous system to autocorrect with every step, which means you may have the exact same loading response for all 10,000 or 15,000 steps. However, please remember, not many of those steps are the same. The surface, the irregularity, the shift of your center of gravity, the impact forces, etc., are all going to be slightly different from a micro level. Now, the way that your body uses this subtle different information, vibration, skin stretch, etc., is actually called noise. And this noise that's coming in is very important to the way that your body creates accuracy. So movement accuracy. You want your loading response to be accurate for every step that you're taking 10,000 times a day. The more noise you bring in, the more accurate your response will be. Now, a way that you can often describe noise is if you think of, and we did this in a workshop I did today, is let's say you're standing on one foot. Let's say you're barefoot. So you're bringing in that information from the skin on the bottom of the foot. As you're standing on one leg, your ankle joint capsule has little subtle shifts that's bringing in proprioceptive information. Your inner ear, let's say maybe you're turning your head, is bringing in some proprioceptive information. And then your eyes are bringing in proprioceptive information as well. Your body uses that combination of eyes, ears, joint capsule, and skin on the bottom of the foot to provide information. Now, let's say you're standing on that same leg and you were to shut your eyes. As soon as you shut your eyes, you will most likely notice that your ankle starts to move, micro movement, invert, evert, invert, evert, subtle movements, which is creating what's called noise. That's another example of your body trying to pull in noise to create a more accurate response. And it's just the way that your body compensates and adjusts for these subtle shifts in center of gravity or for subtle shifts as you're taking a step. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of people, when we think of noise, let's say like you're studying and there's, conversation in the background or like white noise, we actually tune out a lot of that noise. So this is going to play a very important role when it comes to inserts and textured inserts. Is if you are standing in your shoe and the next time, if it's daytime where you're at, just stand for a moment in your shoes or stand for a moment as I'm speaking. And as you stand there and you're kind of processing other information, you're listening to what I'm saying, do you start to tune out your feet? I even notice that I do this after, and all I do is think about feet all day and talk about feet all day. But I start to notice that as my mind shifts to focus on other things, I actually tune out my foot. So it's a part of what's called dual tasking. And the way that your central nervous system handles all of this processing of information is it has to start to prioritize different information. Now, let's say we are walking and talking or thinking about something, or we're trying to recall something, or maybe we're checking something on our phone, or we're multitasking essentially. When it comes to multitasking, doing dynamic movement, your central nervous system has a choice to either prioritize cognitive function, which means the ability to process that information of memory recall or maintaining that conversation, etc., making an appointment, versus processing proprioceptive information, which means that is your ability to maintain dynamic balance of your foot and ankle, center of gravity, postural control during walking. As we age, our ability to multitask starts to shift or delay, and your central nervous system takes and makes cognitive processing a priority, which means as we age, our ability to maintain proprioceptive input and balance and stability while we're walking and process cognitive goes down, increased fall risk. So that is an important consideration when it comes to dealing with baby boomers and fall risk and a delayed in proprioceptive information, or you have a client or patient with neuropathy, whether it's diabetic or chemotherapy related, is your proprioceptive training for that client or for that patient must include the ability to dual task. Just simply having your client stand on a wobble board, barefoot even, does not mean that that's going to translate to walking and multitasking, which is where most falls occur. So the way that we can start to bring this information is from the barefoot training into the surface science. So when we think about surfaces are this interface between your body and the ground. The body-ground interaction is going to obviously have impact forces or some sort of stimulation through the gravity. Gravity encountering ground creates impact forces. We perceive impact forces as vibration. Okay? Every surface vibrates differently. The best surface for doing dynamic movements and bringing in vibration, in my opinion, would be a wood floor or a more natural surface. The wood floor, thinking like an old school dance studio, a lot of the ones that we have here in New York have the perfect vibration within them. As you start to shift onto surfaces that are maybe concrete does not vibrate, which means that as you strike that surface, you have to take more vibration. And if your body can only stop so much vibration, you're clearly going to get injured. Okay? So as those vibration comes in, we must match that vibration with the contraction or the stiffness of our muscles, and that is how you damp vibrations. That's how you load. That's referred to as the muscle tuning theory by Dr. Nag. Biggest takeaway for here is that we need to control the surface. The surface is not controlling us, which means you must be able to bring that information in through the surface to allow your nervous system to create an appropriate response. Remember, your movement accuracy or the accuracy of your loading response requires sufficient noise. You have to bring in that essential noise through the skin and the bottom of the foot. Now, the way that this can influence our body's loading response is that you have two different types of loading responses. And this is really based on the surface and is based on the information that's coming in. You can either have what's called a soft landing technique or a stiff landing technique. When you do a soft landing technique, that's primarily a hip and knee flexion driven loading response. However, as you shift to a stiff landing response, this is much more driven around the ankle and the knee. It's going to be a stiffer loading response. Okay? If we take this into running and different running techniques, is heel toe running is going to have a softer landing technique, whereas a midfoot strike pattern will have a stiffer landing technique. Now, stiffer landing technique does not mean that you are landing on a locked extended leg. It means that you have sufficient fascial stiffness, hence the stiff landing, to rapidly load and unload those impact forces. So when you think about landing techniques and stiffness, the higher the stiffness of your landing technique, technically, the faster you get off the ground. So there's research that shows that faster acceleration is directly related to the stiffness, leg stiffness on foot contact. So what makes you fast is your ability to get off of the ground. It is not related to how quickly you can bring your leg forward. It's about how quick can you shorten your contact time through sufficient stiffness. Okay? So you technically would get off of the ground faster. So if we look at this, a midfoot strike pattern has a stiffer landing technique, which means you're getting off of the ground faster. If we get injured when we're on the ground, your goal is to get off of the ground faster. So that's a huge reason of why you see less injuries in a midfoot strike pattern versus a heel toe strike pattern. Other thing that I want to reference here real quick is that time to exposure is different between a stiff landing technique and a soft landing technique. The stiffer the landing technique, you're essentially landing off, right? So contact, boom, you're off. Your time to exposure is going to be very short. When you do a softer landing technique, your time to exposure to those impact forces is much greater. We want to have short, quick little burst exposure to impact forces, which means you're rapidly using those impact forces. The longer you drag it out, clearly that's going to translate to an increased injury risk. So, softer surfaces can be directly correlated with a softer landing technique, which means the softer the surface or the softer the shoe, could almost say that, if your shoe is softer, has more cushion, you are spending more time on the ground, or your exposure to those impact forces is going to be longer. Versus a stiffer surface, you're going to have a stiffer landing technique, which means you're going to get off of the ground quicker, and your exposure to impact will be shorter. Could technically correlate that to shoes as well, with the stiffer, meaning if you're wearing a more minimal shoe, your accuracy is going to be, or your loading response is going to be more accurate, which means you can achieve sufficient stiffness and you get off of the ground faster. So definitely correlated to surfaces. You could correlate that to shoes. You could correlate that to time to exposure over impact forces, injury risk, and speed. So when you look at sprinting cleats are actually stiff for the same reason that you need the shoe to be stiff, because you need the foot to be stiff if you're going to run that fast. If you were sprinting in like a New Balance sneaker, even if you were doing, say, a 4-foot technique, that shoe is way too soft. There's no way that you can transfer those impact forces and get off of the ground fast enough to win that 100-meter dash. You need the sprinting cleat that is stiff. So when we start looking at some of these impact forces and shifting it to different sports, let's say, if we look at gymnastics. So I'm fascinated with gymnastics research, not just because I was a gymnast, but because it really looks at a lot of impact forces and the body being able to take very high load. There's some studies that show that gymnasts, certain tumbling passes with gymnasts, they've had up to 14 times their body weight in impact forces, which is massive. Totally fascinating that you can get that exposure and not get injured. So this study happened to notice that between elite gymnasts and recreational gymnasts, is that elite gymnasts had 30% higher impact forces, which means that the way that they are tumbling or the way that they are engaging and activating their muscles is they're actually bringing in and creating much higher impact forces. Now, if you read that just kind of straight across, you would say or think that, okay, if an elite gymnast has higher impact forces than a recreational gymnast, that means the elite gymnast is inevitably going to get injured due to the higher impact forces. However, this other study saw that elite gymnasts actually adopted stiffer landing techniques than recreational gymnasts. So even though the elite gymnast has higher impact forces, they're actually landing stiffer to match the higher impact forces. So their time to exposure to those higher impact forces is going to be less. The elite gymnast, what allows them to achieve stiffer landing techniques is going to be that they're actually falling into a pre-activation state. That pre-activation state is everything that Dr. Nigg speaks about. That's what the muscle tuning theory is about. That's the way that I reference the barefoot activation and barefoot training, is that your nervous system falls into an anticipatory or a pre-activation state. So not only are elite gymnasts experiencing higher impact forces, but they are stiffer when they contact the ground, and they are stiffening faster than a recreational gymnast. All of that translates to higher transfer of impact forces, which means they're going to have higher heights of their tumbling passes or different release moves or vaults, etc., which means they're going to achieve higher potential, have more complicated skills, etc. So it's not going to directly translate into a higher injury risk. We can take this exact same concept from gymnasts to runners. Now, runners adopt that same leg stiffness strategy as gymnasts. The leg stiffness strategy, particularly in a mid-foot strike pattern, because remember, mid-foot strike is stiff, heel strike is soft. We want to have a stiff landing technique to get off of the ground and actually to run faster. So runners doing a midfoot strike pattern have a stiffening strategy that enables what's called the spring theory of energy transfer. That technically allows them to effectively load and unload their fascia, which is the exact same thing that the gymnast is doing when they are stiffening during that tumbling pass. These faster speeds that a runner wants to achieve requires higher leg stiffness. So they are matching that, which means that as you shift and you run faster and faster, you may start as a heel strike, then you're going faster, so you're going to switch to a midfoot strike. By the time you're in an all-out sprint, you have to be in a forefoot strike. There's no way that you can win a 100-meter dash and be a heel striker. You don't reach sufficient stiffness that way, which means there's no way that you can get off of the ground fast enough. So leg stiffness is directly correlated with contact time, which is directly correlated with speed and acceleration. This is happening on a continuously adjusted period, just like when we're walking. Every step when you're running has to be adjusted because not one step is the same as the previous. Okay? So again, muscle tuning theory, if you are not familiar with this, please check this out. The pre-activation technique or pre-activation responses are affected by surface, which we just spoke about. You're going to have higher pre-activation responses on harder, stiffer surfaces than on softer surfaces. So thinking like a wood, or if you think mats, like you're going to land on a mat, you would have a faster pre-activation on a stiffer mat or a harder mat versus a soft mat. So it's just bringing in more information. This is also affected by orthotics or insoles, which is what I'm going to speak about next. And then it's also affected by compression sleeves or compression socks. That there's a lot of good research showing that using compression sleeves leads to faster pre-activation rates. Something that you can start to explore a little bit more. So this is where we are going to be taking our texture beyond surfaces. So we are going to start looking at insoles. The texture to the left is the Naboso insole. This is our prototype. This is not the final product. Final product is going to be a little bit harder in density, and it's going to be a little bit sharper. You're not going to perceive any of this So just know that it's going to be a little bit sharper, a little bit harder, because we're going to be putting a top layer on top of this material to help absorb sweat. Because the goal with textured insoles is you have to wear them barefoot. If you're going through the effort to bring in that proprioceptive stimuli through a textured insole and you wear socks, you're really negating the benefit of that textured insole. So off the bat, we see that textured insoles decrease medial lateral sway in healthy adults. Perfect. That's awesome. Textured insoles decrease medial lateral sway as we age. Other huge benefit. But can we start to apply this to performance, which is another huge area of application, and it opens a lot of additional opportunities. So if we were to look at texture for performance, here's a few examples of studies, and then I'll go into a few other ones. So textured insoles in ballet dancers' shoes shows greater ankle proprioception, or let's say faster ankle proprioception, and the ability to detect an inversion moment. So there was a direct correlation between the rate of perceived shift in a joint and the textured insole. Another study was done by the same researcher that looked at wearing the textured insoles, not even during their dance shoes, but just while they were in school or walking around, activities of daily living, they were going to wear these textured insoles. And then when they would train dance, they would not have the textured insole. And what they saw is that even that way, they saw a transfer of improved proprioceptive accuracy. So there is definitely a carryover if you're wearing textured insoles, not even during your sport, which is super cool and super powerful. Last study here that we saw, Waddington happens to do a lot of textured insole research. So if you want to look at more, please check out his work. Textured insoles and football cleats improved ankle inversion and plantar flexion detection. So the exact same thing. It's just using a different type of shoe and a different sport. There is another study that I do not reference here, and it looked at textured insoles and compression socks in soccer players, and they saw that there was a stronger kick power in those who had the textured insole and the compression sleeves, which means you're just getting dual proprioceptive input, which translated to greater force production. Super cool study. I will include that in the bibliography as well. So these other ones were showing balance, ankle proprioception, but this is a very interesting study that looked at textured insoles and the effect on gait. This study happens to be another Dr. Nig study, which I love his research. Anyone who follows my stuff knows that I love Dr. Nig's research. So what they saw is that using textured insoles in shoes, but no socks. That is the key thing. So these textured insoles in this study was not with socks. What they saw from a gait parameter perspective is that if you use the textured insoles, you will actually have decreased soleus, tibialis anterior, and rectus femoris activity, which means that you are not moving as hard. If you are bringing in more information through your proprioceptive system, through the texture, the accuracy of your control during gait is going to go up, which means you don't have to work as hard. So your muscles can start to decrease their activity, which eventually means you will offset fatigue, which is always the goal. Offsetting fatigue of muscles ultimately leads to a decrease in connective tissue fatigue. So thinking of different tendinitises, very powerful as well. What they also saw is that there was an increased plantar flexion angle at heel strike. Now, when we walk and we strike our heels, we get initial contact heel strike. The more dorsiflexion you have at heel contact, the higher the impact forces you're encountering. So I'll actually guide and teach my patients when I do gait training with them is that when they strike the ground at heel strike, they should increase their plantar flexion angle, which means drop their forefoot down, almost strike the ground flat-footed, in a sense, if you could visualize that. And this is something that Dr. Nig also noted in those who were wearing textured insoles, is that they auto-corrected and they decreased that ankle dorsiflexion angle at initial contact. Now, this is something that I see a lot in my runners and patients who wear minimal shoes. It is their way of auto-correcting against the impact forces. If you're bringing in that accurate information, you can then auto-adjust and not strike as hard because you get all that vibration, the texture, proprioception, you know exactly how hard you're striking the ground. Last thing that they noticed is, or second to last thing that they noticed, is that the time to peak shifted in the textured insoles, which is great, right? You're not getting as sudden of an impact peak when you have the textured insole. Again, that's based on their movement corrections in response to the proprioceptive information. Final thing that they noticed is that they actually saw this effect on the contralateral side, which means that if we used a textured insole on one side, which I don't know why you would do that outside of research, but if you had a textured insole on one side, they actually saw that there were similar effects on the contralateral side, which means that your body likes symmetry, especially in reciprocal patterning such as walking. So super cool study that we'll reference in the bibliography to check out. This is one of the first studies that looked at gait parameters with textured insoles. So not just does this improve your balance, but how does this affect muscle activity, which is huge. So this leads us into Naboso. If you are not familiar with Naboso, Naboso is a patent pending surface that I developed over the last couple of years in response to not having appropriate barefoot training surfaces. So I was asked a lot as I travel all around, people are asking, what is the ideal surface to train barefoot on? Should it be a hardwood floor? What if my client has carpet? Should they be on a yoga mat? Should we use AstroTurf? And it was continuously asked the most effective surface. Then a lot of the very astute professionals were saying, okay, well, if we're barefoot and that small nerve, how could I possibly get texture in? So they're very in tune with how we could do this. How could we optimize skin stretch or deep pressure? So how can I get into these small nerves a little bit more? That's truly what started leading into the development of Naboso and the small nerve proprioceptive material that is the basis of the Naboso mat and the Naboso insoles. So it is a 3 millimeter layer of TPE that is a density and texture that's based on research. So the shape of this texture, again, based on research, the distance between each of these stimulations is, again, based on research. So if you want to have accurate small nerve proprioceptive stimulation, you need to make sure that the distance and the height and the severity and the density and the sharpness of that texture is going to accurately create a response. That's something that was very important to me. And when you start looking at textured research, some texture actually throws off your balance. And that's not something that we want to do. It's not necessarily better to work harder, which means that if you're working harder to stabilize your nervous system, does that necessarily translate to you walking? I would argue no, because you're trying to train your nervous system to be very tuned, very sharp, very accurate. If you're continuously forcing your nervous system to struggle to find the accuracy of that postural control, you're probably going to hit a fatigue point, and then your nervous system, it becomes counterproductive. That's very different than, lifting heavy weights to create a constant stimulus to your muscle. Like, that's very different. When it comes to the nervous system and postural control, it's not a matter of shocking your system and continuously throwing it in this unstable environment to create stability. You may be learning a very specific skill. So if you do a lot of training on, say, a BOSU, or you're one of the individuals that likes to stand on a physio ball, no judgment. But if you're standing on a physio ball, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to sprain your ankle when you're walking. You're not going to, if you accidentally step on a pebble, does that mean that you can autocorrect faster because you've been standing on a physio ball? Absolutely not. Standing on a physio ball is a skill that you happen to learn. It's kind of like a circus trick. Not that I'm bringing it down that way, but it technically is. You've taught your nervous system to adapt to that environment. Is that environment transferring to walking? No. So just know why you're doing something and then make sure that it's transferring. Okay, so when it comes to Naboso, what we have so far is we have the barefoot training mat, which can be used for rehab, corrective exercise, children, seniors, athletes, fitness, etc. We have a flooring system that we're bringing out as well. However, our second product that we're launching in April of this year is going to be our Insoles. I had pictures of them before, but again, we're modifying them. Our next version, we're going to be opening prototypes in the next several weeks. All of that will be on our website as well on our different social media. So stay tuned with that as well so that you can explore how this may have an important role with some of your clients or with your athletes. Remembering and thinking about the research that the textured insole doesn't necessarily have to be in your soccer cleat or have to be in your ski boot. That would be awesome. But just using that textured insole throughout the day still showed a transfer, which is super cool. So how can we start to apply this and understanding surface science with our athletes, patients, seniors, children is please think about the foot and the skin on the bottom of the foot as the gateway into your nervous system. Think of it as the autocorrector that must be continuously stimulated with every step or every shift in our center of gravity to create an accurate postural response or postural control response or a accurate loading response to then load and unload efficiently. All those subtle shifts and all of that proprioceptive information really is used to maintain dynamic balance. As we age, our ability to dual task starts to decline, with a prevalence shifting towards cognitive function where proprioceptive takes a wayside. So let's say if you happen to be working with any seniors or neuropathy, Parkinson's, etc., so that category where they're starting to lose that ability to dual task, you want to think about helping them bring in and enhancing the proprioceptive side of things so that during your fall reduction training or your dual task training, balance training, that you have enhanced proprioception and then you're tying in some sort of cognitive drill at the exact same time. That's going to translate a lot more towards dynamic balance during walking and locomotion. With children, this is a huge stimulation that could be used. Minimal shoes in children, barefoot stimulation in children. There's a lot of research that's starting to look at cognitive function and development in children that's directly correlated to barefoot stimulation. When you're thinking about work performance, you can actually see a correlation between foot stimulation and attention, which is totally fascinating. I was telling the group I was teaching today about the Naboso technology, and I've had some practitioners getting their ADHD, autistic, Asperger children and patients on the mat, and it centers them. It kind of quiets and brings their focus into a position that they're going to be able to get more rehab done or more of their studying, et cetera, et cetera. So if you think of even for young, healthy adults who wants to enhance their work performance and they were to use the insoles at work, technically that might help their focus when they're on the job, which is super cool. So there's a lot of powerful applications that we can use. Try not to limit it just to fitness and rehab or performance. Know that it exceeds so many other applications with some very exciting new research that's coming out. And as the concept of surface science continues to be brought up and at the forefront, we'll continuously see more and more research, which I think is super exciting. So the potential is absolutely there. So as we wrap up, if you have any questions, please type those in. I know that there's a few. If you happen to have to go and you want the PowerPoint, please email me, education@ebfafitness.com. If you missed some of the beginning or you had to jump off in the end, please check us out on YouTube. We will be sending everyone the archived webinar with this. And then I encourage you to check out Naboso technology and our mat. Our insoles are coming soon. It's available on Amazon. We just got distribution with Perform Better in the US. We just launched in Australia, Taiwan, Czech Republic, Italy, Belgium. So you're going to start seeing it more and more, which is extremely exciting. So going to jump on to any of these questions. All right. So I can't find my cursor. Okay. So Tim, you got the email address, which is great. So more instability, the more noise the foot will produce in order to get more information. Hence the eversion, inversion. Absolutely. So as soon as you shut your eyes, let's say you stand on an Eric's pad, you're going to get a lot of wobble wobble on the Eric's pad, right? Because essentially the Eric's pad is blocking your plantar proprioceptors. So now it has no choice but to bring that information in through the joint capsule of your ankle. If you stand on an Eric's pad and you shut your eyes, you're going to get even more wobble wobble of the ankle, which is the quote unquote noise that is needed to maintain your dynamic balance so that you don't fall. Okay, so that noise is important. Okay, as transitioning into a lesser drop shoe, I understand there's a transition time, especially for running. Oops. You have not been running due to a couple months in tendonitis. Will barefoot training at home, at work, around help to shorten the transition time to running in a lesser drop shoe? So it's essentially the adaptation period. So the way that I recommend adapting to minimal shoes, and essentially you have to allow your nervous system to adapt to that information. So going from a thick supportive cushion shoe on concrete to a minimal shoe on concrete, your body doesn't know how to control the impact forces once it's coming in because it hasn't been doing it for forever, maybe if you've always been in cushion shoes. So wearing minimal shoes at home, minimal shoes around the office, maybe just at the gym. So you're slowly starting to bring in more of this proprioceptive information, building sufficient strength within your neuromuscular system to appropriately load, and then you just start to increase your time to exposure in these minimal shoes, making sure that you're doing it in a transitional way. If you're truly going to switch into a midfoot minimal strike pattern, you need to make sure that you have a sufficiently strong foot and that your foot and core are talking to each other. All of those exercises I have on the YouTube channel under a playlist that's called Run Injury Free. And I recommend doing barefoot training as a part of a transitional program, meaning that 2 times a week, 20 to 30 minutes of barefoot exercises is key to that transition. Which I hope that helps. Okay, so yes, so Whitney, we just launched distribution in Australia. If you are interested in buying a Naboso mat in Australia, please email me at orders@nabosotechnology.com and I will send you our distributor's information so that you can buy the mats and we don't have to send it for lots and lots of money from the US. All right. Would it still be best to be barefoot if one is able to do a sport barefoot? Is able to do a sport barefoot. I'm not quite sure if that means like playing basketball barefoot. What I can say is that certain sports are designed to be barefoot, obviously, such as gymnastics and martial arts and things like that. Other sports such as basketball, soccer, football, the shoe plays a very important role in traction and change of direction and friction and things like that. But your goal is to use barefoot training and barefoot activation to keep the foot very much connected to the shoe. So you still need to keep the foot alive in the shoe and moving and engaging and contracting and spreading the digits and short footing and really kind of connecting with that shoe, controlling the shoe versus the shoe controlling them. That's where I really like these textured insoles, and super excited to see some of the opportunities that even you guys yourself use with these textured insoles. As far as distribution in Canada, we are working on that, Kennedy. If you want to chat, we can hopefully set that up. Perfect. All right. If there are no other questions, or I happen to miss a question, or you have a question that you're thinking of as I'm speaking right now, you can always email me, education@ebfafitness.com. Again, I encourage you to check out the different websites. Please follow us on social media, and we will make sure that we get this information to you. If you have not attended one of our live workshops, please do check those out. We also have our BTS Level 1 online, which if you go to ebfaonline.com, that has all of our online courses. I thank you guys all so much. Have an amazing night or have a great day, depending on where you are. And I will see you again soon on another webinar.